I'd be happy to, Matt. Thanks. Good afternoon. Before we get started with today's P&A Ad Symposium session, we ask you to join us in celebrating some of the award-winning submissions from the 2021 P&A Advertising Foundation contest. By sharing these winning entries, we hope to honor talent and success and add to the ideas and takeaways you are receiving through this week's sessions. Each year, the Foundation Advertising Contest recognizes ad departments from Pennsylvania news companies who are producing outstanding print and digital ads, as well as other revenue-generating campaigns and products. The 2021 contest was judged by members of the New York Press Association. Across the 4 circulation divisions, over 320 entries were received from 20 news organizations. More than 130 have been recognized with first, second, and honorable mention awards, with certificates and plaques mailed earlier this month. Today, we highlight the winners of 2 of the 14 categories. In the special event vendor support idea category, entries are separate, standalone, pull-out sections or pages. Judges consider the basic idea, originality, organization, development of theme and ads, and creativity in section or pages. For the best automotive transportation ad, entries may be print or digital, classified or display. Congratulations to these award recipients and all of the 2021 winners. We invite you to view a compilation of all winning entries on the P&A website at panewsmedia.org. Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Joyce. I'm the publisher at the Republican Herald in Pottsville. Thank you for attending today's session of the P&A Advertising Symposium. In our time together today, Dr. Renee Tacka will help us learn how to develop sales strategies using various data such as demographics, behaviors, lifestyles, spending, attitudes, interests, opinions, and trends easily culled from various sources. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to work with Renee before, her complete biography can be found on today's event page. And I need to say, I've been lucky enough this week to attend several of the sessions that the P&A has offered, and each one that I've participated in, the speaker has really talked about the importance of selling data, selling with data. So we are very, very fortunate to have an expert talk to us about that today. And with that, turn it over to Renee. Renee.
All right, fantastic. So welcome everybody. Thanks to all of you for joining us for today's presentation. We're going to talk today about data-driven advertising. Those of you that have worked with me in the past know that I am a big proponent of data and believe that it is tremendously important to our sales process, not only because it helps support what you're doing, but also because, frankly, and I've seen it in action, it helps you sell less, because the numbers can do a lot of the story for you. So let's talk about why it's important for us to use data in our sales processes. When we think about what is going on in the marketplace and what has happened over the last year, the growth of e-commerce has just been off the charts. And what's interesting, even when I looked at these numbers, that actually a couple years ago, Amazon accounted for 40% of US online sales. So actually with this last year and with the pandemic and more organizations putting focus on e-commerce, Amazon actually lost market share, which I found very interesting when you think about why it's important to understand what's going on out there. The other thing that we have to remember is, as we think about data and as we think about advertising, what does that mean to our consumers? So you're going to hear me talk a lot today about making sure that data matches the consumer buying process. So in order to do that, and in order to create solutions for advertising, we really have to make sure we know what is going on in our consumer marketplace. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the way that consumers spend. Frugality remains trendy. There's a significant increase in private store brands and them buying more shelf space, even within the stores. Shoppers are buying across channels because they're looking for the best deal. So especially with people not going in the stores as often, with things being closed, they had more of an option to buy from this place, buy from this place, buy from this place, as opposed to the all-in-one shop. We've also seen a significant growth in off-price retailers, growth in the sharing economy, such as rideshare, secondhand retailer, and things like even Airbnb, where people are renting homes and cars and all of these other things from peer to peer. And what we also have to pay attention to, and what I talk a lot about in my marketing classes at York College, is the fact that there's a significant rise in consumer to consumer sharing. Consumers are sometimes less trusting about what we would call the push message coming from the advertiser, and more trusting on what consumers are saying. So many times you see that people are looking at reviews, they're looking at influencers. And so we have to, as marketers, try to figure out what is the balance between putting out a good message, creating our brand, creating awareness, and supporting it with numbers and testimonials. But we also have to make sure that those reviews and the things that are happening outside that we have a little bit less control over are also help aligning and supporting our brand. Part of our challenge is the fact that with over 9.7 million people out of work, money has to stretch. So people are cutting expenses. They're eliminating unnecessary luxuries, which, needs, wants, demands. Those luxuries are kind of the wants. Do I need it to survive? Not really. So I put it on the back burner with regard to, am I able to buy it right now? They're also negotiating everything from deferring loans payments, refinancing auto loans, service providers for cell phones, TV. Everything is an option for negotiation. Sometimes they're looking to freeze memberships and trim subscriptions. So when we think about our advertisers and what they're dealing with, this is the consumer. This is the behavior that they are engaging with. So when they do their sales presentations and present advertising campaigns, you've got to make sure that depending upon what retailer or service provider you're working with, that you think about that consumer, what's happening, and then make sure your messaging aligns with that. Media decisions are critically important for four reasons, really. And we know this because media connects advertisers to the consumers. Media communicates products, brands, and shopping. Media can also be aligned well with the marketing messages and what you do with those media. Media can also be targeted, whether it's mobile, it's online, it's print. You have tremendous opportunities to be able to target. So our marketing challenge really becomes that if a consumer doesn't see your message, no matter how creative or brilliant the idea, it is not an effective message, because effectiveness means it's accomplishing the goals that we need it to accomplish. So what do? So to me, data becomes fundamental to supporting your proposed advertising solution. It becomes fundamental to making sure that you're recommending the right things at the right time to the right clients. So when we think about market insights, what are they? So let's talk a little bit about that. So when you think about what are market insights and how can you utilize them, I made a list of different ways, and I'm sure this list is endless. I mean, I tried to really pull these together as tightly as possible. You can use market insights to describe your market, from urbanization to household composition to spending. Any of those things would help describe a market. You can also use market insights to understand an audience. So describing, looking at demographics for people, behaviors, and lifestyles. Also from a business perspective, size, industry, number of employees, sales, all of those things become very important when you're looking at business to business initiatives as well. The other thing that market insights allow us to do is uncover what I call in class AIOs, attitudes, interests, and opinions. So those attitudes, interests, and opinions drive behavior in ways that are often very difficult to measure. How people behave or decisions that they make with regard to family at home versus people at work or even friends might affect how their decision-making differs. We can also use market insights for sales and advertising strategies. We can use data for sales and territory planning, supporting an idea that you have, or possibly discovering unexpected trends. One of the things that I love about data is sometimes until you actually run a report, you're not sure what you're looking for. You know, it's kind of it's a little game. Let's see what's out there that I haven't thought of. So when you think about what does this mean to me and what does this mean to my sales reps? One of the things that I always talk about in my sales classes and whenever I do sales trainings, I think about using data as turning cold calls warm. We know from a management perspective and possibly even from, from a sales perspective, there's a lot of reps that might not like cold calling. Well, my view of the world is with data and the internet out there, cold calling really isn't cold calling anymore. So here's my difference between what is a cold call and what is a warm call. A cold call is something where there's no existing customer relationship, there's no pre-planning that has been done. It's potentially unorganized because you think of a cold call as, hey, I'm just stopping in and I really didn't have a plan for that. Cold calls can also be viewed as typically push selling. On the other side, I look at a warm call as being things that are pre-planned. You can get in front of your internet, you can Google, you can look at a company, you can look at people, you can look at social media, you can look at LinkedIn. There's so many options for pre-planning. It also contains sales intelligence, and some of that intelligence can be gathered by other resources that we'll talk about in a second. Warm calls have an organized plan for discussion. They have a direction that you want to move in. So as opposed to not being organized and not knowing how I want to start the conversation or what is my introduction or talking about the industry, you actually do have an organized path. And it really helps you position a product or service as a solution to a problem, as opposed to it just being, hey, I'm just suggesting this for the heck of it. So the big question that I always get is, where in the world do I find market insights? Well, what you're going to see today, and I see Jane Hunt Gardner is on here, so she has lots of information for you, and I'm going to share some of that data for you because P&A can provide you with a lot of information, especially I know if you're in the PA market. But there's also some free things to find out there. So for business and market information, you can look at Pew Research Center, data.gov, the SBA.gov, the census, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, Hoover's, Bloomberg. There's so many opportunities for you to look for and find some basic business market information. The other place that you can look for consumer information are places like the census, again, data.gov. Pew Research Center does great research with regard to what's happening with internet, what's happening with social media, what's happening with cable and some other things. I found the Population Research Bureau will often have some things. If you go to mybestsegments.com, there is a free tool that you can use some of the research, but again, it's better than having nothing. And as I said, Jane has a lot of information in a lot of different categories that you could talk to P&A and see what they might have available through all of their research. So when we think of other digital tools, I've put a list here of things that you guys can consider. Websites and social media. New York Times actually has a searchable indexed archive of news articles back to 1851. We obviously have Google, Yahoo, Yellow Pages. All of these are probably very familiar to you, but if your reps aren't as familiar, it might be something you want to share with them, once again, to help them make their cold calls warm so that they've got more planning put in there. When you think about Yahoo, Yahoo's different than Google because Yahoo is really it's more of a directory search. So in this case, I did an example of how to make goat cheese. So you think about Yahoo as topic-based and what might be something of interest, and you will see that it gives you different findings than actually Google, which is based off of an algorithm, as opposed to just a directory of topics. So Yahoo is another good place to go. What I've included in this presentation is some different ways that you can search. And once again, I found that various reps have different levels of knowledge with regard to how do you use Google for, once again, turning those cold calls warm. So you'll see in here that I give you, basic Google search. Most people don't realize that if you put the plus sign or the minus sign, it'll add something or remove something from your search. If you do quotes for quotes, it'll give you the exact phrase. One of the things that we always talked about in digital marketing that I remind everybody is the fact that some people don't realize that word order in Google means something. So the way the algorithm looks at it, emphasis is placed on the first word and less information or less emphasis is placed on the last word. So if you do too big of a search, you're actually going to lose some of the context. So thinking about how you tighten the word order in your search. You can also use business lists. So I give you an example that if you were really interested in knowing goat cheese companies in Lancaster County, you could do quote list of goat cheese companies near Lancaster County, and Google's going to give you a more direct search. The other thing that I give you on this slide is actually some more information for how do you index. So if you want something from a data range, you can actually, so in this case, if you wanted to know about the target data breach, you would do target plus the, in quotes, the security breach, and then do 2011 to 2016. You can use an asterisk to have Google fill in the blanks for you. You can use a company site search. So if you know that you're interested in calling on a client, but you don't know the person's name or you don't know how to find them, this company site search would actually be a great way for you to be able to go in and have Google search their site for you to see how you can actually find the information you're looking for. Again, cold call warm, right? Other thing is if you're looking for particular files, you can actually search by if you want to see what PDFs that the Nielsen company has, then this would be a way that you would do it. You would quote Nielsen company file type PDF. So I show you all of this because I feel like when we're in sales, anything that we can do to turn those cold calls warm and using data to not only break through that first call, but also make sure we're connecting with the client, it really helps us manage the sales call. And I always look, and in my meeting this afternoon with a prospective student who just flew in from Georgia to look at York College, we were just talking about this, that data is the GPS of a sales call. I really feel like you can use data to reinforce your entire sales call and help you be able to support the solution that you're offering. And in many cases, your client will appreciate the information because they know it's not just, hey, nobody's doing it. Data helps show that no, a lot of people are doing this. So when we think about our sales call, these are, when I teach sales, these are the 7 steps of your sales call. Actually 8 if you take your objections and your close, your presentation, and separate those out. And data could be used at any level of this presentation. When you're telling the value story, or when you're identifying potential customers, or even follow up after the order, if you get people to agree to testimonials that you can share with others. This is where I feel data helps direct the sales call. When you take those sales steps that I just gave you and you break it down, you really have 3 steps that define not your cold calling in my mind, but warm calling, which your prospecting, qualifying, pre-approach. Negotiations and objectives can be handled in the closing the sale, and your post-purchase, that can be part of your ad design. So ultimately, using data at all points of this can help you manage that sales call. So the big question that everybody asks is, okay, so we know where to find data. So how do I engage this data? How do I put it into my sales process? So I thought that by putting it into an advertising planning process, it might help you see a little bit better what this looks like. So for me, when I think about advertising, I think about how do we build the strategic foundation to our advertising plan? And for me, that's answering 4 questions. Who are the targets? What are they like? Where can we find them? And how can we reach them? That is going to take you through your entire ad sales plan and make sure that you stay on track with what you're learning from the client. So obviously we know that a majority of our client meetings, it's listening. So by the point that we've gotten here where we're presenting our advertising plan, we've already done a needs assessment. We've asked a lot of questions so that we can make sure that we're presenting the right information to them. So I feel like great campaigns actually do start with information. And what I've done is broken out those 4 questions to you to let you see how they all contribute to the audience. So when we ask who is the audience, you're really asking about demographics or life stage or attitudes and interests and opinions. When you ask where do they live, you're asking about, well, what neighborhoods, what zip codes, what regions. When you want to know what they're like, it's about their behaviors, their lifestyles, and their media preferences. So we remember that our advertising plans have to go across the path to purchase, and they have to have multiple touch points. Consumers are on the move, so we've got to make sure that we have print that hits them, we've got digital that hits them, we've got web that hits them. All of those things become important. And then the question becomes, when we deliver a solution to them, the audience has to be able to get content in different ways. As we know, with between mobile and online and traditional media, we've got a lot of options, and we've got to pull all of those touch points together to once again meet with the consumer on various media. So here's an example. If we were going to say who are the targets, and this information is one that comes from some of P&H data. So what we're trying to understand in the who are the targets is,
Hello?
yeah. Do I hear a question? Oh, I thought I heard somebody.
I think someone was just unmuted. You're good.
Okay, cool, thanks. So when we think about who are the targets, what we're really trying to do is understand the differences in how these audiences connect or consume the products and services that we're actually looking to connect them with. Because in my mind, it's not really about sales. If we think about what we're doing as connecting consumers to our clients, that's really what we're trying to do. You're trying to sell if you're trying to push something on them that they don't need. When you're trying to solve a problem, it's less about selling and more about connecting to these solutions. So in this case, we can see that part of who are the targets, we're looking at generational. So how does Gen Z look at newspapers? How do baby boomers use newspapers? How do Gen Xers and millennials use newspapers? That would be important for us to understand, okay, if we are going to target based on generation, then how do we use that information to then build our advertising campaign? So one of the important things that you want to find out as you work with your clients is understanding who are their best customers. How they define those best customers could be tremendously different. So using data that you find that could be industry-wide, but also data that they might have in a database or what they know becomes very important. So, asking it in different ways to me too is very important. So not just who are your primary customers, but those primary customers aren't always the most profitable customers. So that's a very different way of asking the question. Also understanding if the client has a secondary target. So let's say that the client wanted to reach Gen Xers, but they also wanted to continue talking with Gen Z or baby boomers, then it's important to understand that there's another audience that you're talking to. And as you develop your advertising strategy, you would use that information to support 2 different versions of the campaign. Another question that you need to ask is, are these viable targets? And what I mean by this is in our marketing classes, we always talk about that when you build segments, you've got to make sure that they have 5 things: that they're distinguishable, they're measurable, they're profitable, they can be reached, and they can be serviced. So what all of that means is when you say they're distinguishable, they have to be similar enough as a group that you can group the data together. You can group that audience together, but yet they have to be different enough that it warrants a segmented marketing strategy versus an undifferentiated mass marketing strategy. When we say that it's measurable, you want to make sure that it's big enough in size and that it has good purchase power. So for example, when I worked at Claritas, we used to tell our clients that about 10 to 15% of the market would be a good size of a target audience because it's large enough to be affordable, but yet at the same time, it's not too small that it makes it a very, very niche initiative, which
Renee,
is why, yeah.
we had a question from the crowd.
Oh, great, okay.
So on the previous slide, you were discussing the ideal customer there. What do you do when your data tells you the ideal customer is different than the customer your client is describing?
I love that question. I love that question. So ultimately, that's kind of a very walk a fine line conversation, because the client is going to feel like, well, I know my client, and most likely they do. But if you're seeing data that shows you a different story, what you want to do is approach it from the perspective of, have you considered working with this group? This is what data is showing me, that in the market we have an opportunity to connect with these consumers as well. So maybe what we need to look at as your primary customers, maybe this is a secondary audience that we can look at. Because that is a very challenging place. And after all the years that I've worked in newspapers, I know exactly what you're meaning, because the client always says, I know exactly who my customers are. So you sort of use it as a bridge to talk about growth, to talk about expansion, to talk about secondary audiences. Hopefully that helps. Great question. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on from useful target segments. So the next question that we talked about is saying, okay, what are they like? So this is where you're getting into, well, I know my targets, but now I need to know, what is their relationship with other products and services outside of my relationship with them? This is where it gets a little bit hard for businesses, because if they're not big in database marketing, then what they might only have is, this person bought from me, this is the frequency that they buy, this is on average how much they spend, but everything is related to just their business. Well, we all as consumers, know that we also have relationships with other clients and other behaviors. So sometimes what we want to understand is, what other things are people doing? And that gives us an idea of other ways to advertise, or other ways to create messaging, or possibly if you're doing contests or giveaways, things that might be promotions that would actually engage the audience again differently. So again, here's some of PNA's information. So when we look at dining enthusiasts, I found it very interesting that for dining enthusiasts, some of their shopping attitudes, that they're embracing the trend towards zero environmental impact. They like meat-free menus. They use plant-based compostable packaging, as well as some of these patrons are interested in purchasing meal kits. So if you were a restaurant or working with a client who's a restaurant who hasn't embarked on meal kits to go, this would be a great piece of data to use when you're talking to them, to say, here's an opportunity for us. Let's identify the audience that is interested in this. Let's put an advertising campaign together to connect with them. The next one is also sporting goods. So when we think about sporting goods, we actually can see here that the concept of athleisure, I love that concept, how we're a little bit more leisurely, but yet we're wearing more athletic wear as kind of our secondary work clothing, and it continues to appeal to both men and women. We also can see here that there are many shoppers who are actually going to crowded public places. They're going to gyms. So they're purchasing home essential equipment. So some people are still just a little bit afraid of, do I want to go out? Is it clean enough for me? So maybe let's just stay home. And what other things can I buy? So if you're actually working with a sporting goods store, then this would be a great thing. Maybe again, like the meal kit, you could put together a workout kit, and maybe that workout kit has some bands, it has some weights, and it has some things so you can get people to kind of create their own home gym packet. It also, the data shows that consumers are also doing equipment rentals. So there's interest there. So, you know, if you were a purveyor of, you know, equipment and people aren't buying, then maybe there's an opportunity for you to possibly rent. So you can see that the what are they like adds another dimension to what are people doing outside. And P&A has a whole bunch of information that would be able to help you. Plus, like I said, if you go to My Best Segments and do zip code lookup through Claritas, it's free. It's very general. You know, it's not really specific, but if you want to look at a particular zip code, if you're in New Jersey or Michigan or New York, you can go in and plug in the zip code, and you can at least get some basic information for how do people, what are they shopping? What do they like to eat? Some basic things on what they're doing. So in order to really connect to the what are people like, when we talk in the marketing classes, we always talk about understanding the buying cycle. And we understand this for our advertising because our advertising should align with how we fit into this buying cycle. And I'll explain to that a little bit more detail in a minute. So the 5 stages of the buying cycle are problem recognition, information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase, post-purchase evaluation. I'm here to tell you, every customer goes through this. But like I said in the middle, the time spent varies whether it's a high or low involvement purchase. Somebody buying a car or a house or even a computer or cell phone will spend more time than somebody who's just looking to buy a bag of potato chips. So understanding the client, the products that you're selling, and then plugging into, is it a high involvement product? Is it a low involvement product? Will help you also understand the number of touch points, where those touch points need to be, and the data that will help you support those decisions. The key here is you want to remember to align your advertising strategies to purchase decision criteria. So how should you address the problem or need? What product or service options exist for the consumer? So in other words, what competition is out there? If you're working with a candle company that's local and they've got these great soy candles that burn for hours, well, we know that Yankee Candle's an option, and what are some other options? So understanding what the competitive landscape looks like is important to recognizing where does this customer fit with regard to brand awareness and likelihood to purchase. Because then when you think about the consumer and how they determine which candle is going to solve the problem or need. So which candle do I want? Is it smell? Is it the longevity? Is it the brand name? Understanding how people buy helps you understand how you put together that ad plan. Even beyond that, you've got to know who else is selling it. From all the years that I've worked with P&A and I've gone out and I've done training, I can remember one training that I went to in Eastern Pennsylvania, and there was a sales rep that was working with a small local pharmacy, and that pharmacy would not advertise with them. And the pharmacy was like, I don't have any competition. And I wasn't from the area. So I asked the sales rep, because the sales rep was saying to me, how do I get them to understand that there is competition? And I asked them, I said, well, let me ask you this question. Do you have CVS? Yes. Do you have Walgreens? Yes. Do you have Walmart? Yes. Do you have Target? Yes. And I said, they have competition. So do you see Target on TV? Do you see Target in preprints? Do you see, CVS? all of these things, and all of a sudden their eyeballs went. And what I explained to them is sometimes showing competition doesn't have anything to do with just showing the numbers. You just have to say that in the marketplace, what places do people have to go to? So even the data that you might show is that in our geography, we have 2 CVSs, a Walgreens, so if you say that, I understand that you think from, that from the individual location, you don't have any independent pharmacies, but it's important that you recognize that you have these 6 pharmacies that you're competing against that have national dollars, national advertising budgets. A slide that looks like that could be tremendously powerful just to them realizing, whoa, I'm not the only game in town. And so that sometimes becomes powerful, which leads us to the where can we find them? So when we understand where these clients are coming from, we can understand how to zone our print, how to zone our preprints, how to do mobile for geolocation or geofencing, how to do social media targeting or targeted web advertising. You can also identify underserved areas for the client. So like we said, how do we talk to them about an audience that might not match their particular perception of who is their customer? Well, that underserved audience could serve as sales growth, could serve as an opportunity for brand awareness. So then our question becomes, all right, well, this is great. We know who the targets are. We know what they're like. We know where we can find them. Now we've got to figure out how do we reach them. This becomes tremendously important when you're starting to think about what does my media mix look like? And I think all of us know that in order to get the consumer across the path to purchase, having a multimedia plan is ultimately one of the best things that you can do. And I know that newspapers have varying, and media companies have varying resources, but just look at what your resources are and see what you can offer with regards to opportunities. So, this again is some more P&A information that I wanted to use just to show you that when you say, those that ate at a restaurant in the past month, well, you can see how many of them are using social media. The fact that 70.9% of them used a newspaper is huge. So when you go out to present your multimedia campaign, you feel comfortable saying, you know what, we can do this using newspaper, using online, or any of the other media that are in your arsenal. One of the key things that you always want to remember as you're building this campaign is to engage consistently with the market. Consumer needs and wants are constantly changing. We saw what happened just this last year, and things that were priorities before became not priorities now. And so ultimately, understanding that you've got to know your client well and understand how consumer needs are changing. Using consistent communication is really necessary to be a buying choice. It's not just a matter of running one ad and being done with it. It's ultimately, there are so many opportunities for customers and consumers to use different forms of media to answer buying decisions that you want to get them multiple times across the path to purchase. You want to make sure you're targeting the right customers, like we said, understanding how they buy, and then creating those messages that actually drive action. So some of the other data that P&A can provide you is also about how you can use advertising to remain top of mind. So even when we're talking in my advertising classes, when you are looking to increase brand awareness, launch a new product, launch a new company, reinforce a brand, you've got to have frequency because you have to create a habit to some extent. So, you're going to use frequency when you're doing that. You're going to use frequency when you're launching a new campaign message. That's really important to make sure that, once again, it anchors into what the consumer is looking for. You want to make sure that the ad message includes some complex copy. So especially when you're in print where you have the ability to put some more content in there, use that opportunity. So like we talked about, when you select your media, think about how media almost works in ranking, where, newspapers can be very visual and you can have a lot of content. Mobile is on the go, gives you geolocation and fencing opportunities. You can get people as they're walking by a store or a location. Online while they're engaging in their computers. So think about how each of those media are used and then identify what that message actually looks like. The challenge is that competitors are actively advertising. So if they are, you want to make sure you're there too. You want to be a choice. And if there's time-sensitive material, you want to make sure that you are going to be in front of clients. The other thing is important is consistency, as we had talked about. So, ultimately, consumers are looking for consistency. They're looking for trusted information. They're seeking more information. They want to learn about new products and services that help satisfy those needs that are important to them. The great news is that all of your media companies, long-standing relationships to your communities and trusted brands, use that to your advantage. Make sure you're in front of that information. I tell my clients all the time, Facebook is not news. It pains me. It is not news. People who write on Facebook are not journalists. That is not where it is, so own your space, be proud of that space and put that top of mind. Part of maintaining that interest is making sure you're breaking through the clutter, making sure that your advertising campaigns have good layout and design, making sure that you have trust in the brands, the company. I will say that if you are working with a client who has very negative reviews online and people aren't recommending them, and you could do the most beautiful ad from an advertising standpoint, and it's going to be hard to go up against all of those bad reviews. So you almost have to work with the client to recognize that you don't want them to think that your ad is not what's working. It's the whole thing that's not working. If consumers are not connecting with that brand or that company, the best ad in the world is not going to change. That if you walk in and it's a bad customer service experience, that's not going to change for the client. So when we think about how do we do our promotion planning, so I've got 5 steps for you to consider. We've already talked about identifying the target audience. We've talked about understanding buyer behavior. What I want to take the last few minutes here to talk about is steps 3, 4, and 5, where we establish our communication objectives so we can use data to support that. We can communicate our brand, including our unique selling points and our differentiation, and reinforce the position of either our products or our clients. So when you think about what am I trying to do? What is my advertising trying to do for my client? The most simple model that you could look at is called the AIDA model: awareness, interest, desire, action. It's called hierarchy of effects, that all consumers move through this because they have to be aware of something in order to make it a choice. So as the previous information said, if it's a new product and nobody's aware, you have to market it to create that awareness. Once you get awareness, then ultimately you're using interest to communicate the appeal of that product to spark interest. So what is the appeal of the product? What are some of those features and benefits? Why would somebody want to consider that? In desire, you're trying to create favorable feelings towards that particular product. And how do you do that? By testimonials, by showing people engaging with the product and using it regularly. And then ultimately, you're trying to get to action, encouraging the purchase, trial, repurchase, share of that particular product. So when you set those objectives, then you can try to figure out, where do I plug data in to make sure that I'm able to do the things that I need to do? So if you have any information about the brand, whether that's, brand awareness, brand recall, any information, sales, if there was an article that was written, anything that helps communicate the brand. What happens when brands are strong, and we can think of all of ourselves as consumers as well, it reduces decision making. I bet you every single one of you could think about a brand that you buy regularly that you don't have to think about because you trust it and you know it's going to satisfy you the way you're expecting. So what we want to try to do, and oftentimes I know for years I would hear, well, no, I don't want to do branding advertising because that actually, that wastes money. That makes me cringe a little bit because branding does not waste money. Branding reduces decision criteria. So if you are that small mom and pop pharmacy, if you're branding yourself, then you can brand yourself as the local choice because CVS isn't local. Walgreens isn't local. They're just local locations. So you could brand yourself as that local pharmacy with the pharmacist that knows the market. They know your name when you walk in the door. All of those things go to helping the brand as well as driving home the advertising campaign and making sure that it connects and it has success. You also want to make sure that you've got differentiation in there. So that we'll talk about here. Differentiation is important, and this is where data helps you tremendously because it distinguishes your company, product, service from the competitors. What data do you have or can you show that helps prove that differentiation? Is it through innovation? Have you just invested in, the top printing presses, or do you have the most up-to-date mobile capabilities? What is it that you're offering that improves your quality or service over the competition? Competitive advantage. So how does the product, service, brand that you're working with, what are the factors that create superiority? What are the benefits that the customers truly need and value? Again, what is that data that you can show? What is that information that you can share? And you can see in the little diagram that really what your unique selling points are is it's everything coming together from what customers want to what your competitors do well to what you do well. And that unique selling point is the integration of all of those things where you get to say, choose us. And all of your data should help validate that. So you can help explain the problem you want to solve, communicate what you do well, and again, show testimonials, show data, show information that would support that. The other thing that I thought is very important to marketing, and how it was used within newspapers when we were in the sales teams was kind of all over the place. Because again, when you're working with small businesses, sometimes they don't believe in positioning, or they don't think that that's something they need to consider. But I want you as sales reps and managers to think about what positioning means. Positioning is not what you do to products, it's what is done in the mind of the consumer. So when you think about, and I use this example all the time, I mean nothing by it, but it's just something that resonates. If I asked you, Target, Walmart, everybody gets in their head and how many of you just said Target, right? It's not Walmart, that's not how it works. When I use that example in the classroom, it's easy for my students to communicate the fact that when they walk into Target, it's bright, it's clean, it looks light, it feels engaging. And Walmart, they feel cluttered, they feel overwhelmed, it's warehousey. In order to change that position that's in the mind, you have to do a lot of work with the brand, the product, and the brick and mortar to change that. So as sales reps and ad managers, I think it's important to think about who the client is you're working with, or what the product is that they're selling, and what is the position that's in the consumer's mind. Are you selling something that has great reviews that are online, that is considered one of the top ranked products? Or is it something that's lower in rank? Well, then you've got to think about, well, that means that the consumer is going to look at that and not necessarily connect with it as easily. So that's going to define how you put together your messaging. You might have to put a little bit more copy in there to sell on the value proposition of why that particular product or service is actually better or is a good choice. So ultimately, thinking about how you're using your advertising and how you're using some of your data to communicate that competitive advantage. Ultimately, when we think about why do we advertise, it inspires consumer action. We want something to happen, whether it's a free trial, call now, follow us, come in for great deals, vote, buy now, you pick an action. That's what we're looking. But one of the things that we have to be clear about when we work with our ad campaign, decide what that one clear call to action is. So if you're putting together a multimedia campaign and it's all about buying this new product, make sure that your print message points to that. Make sure that your online ads point to that. Make sure that your mobile is, if you're doing geofencing or geolocation, when they're walking by the store, it's popping right up on their phone and saying, hey, come in right now on sale. Because all of those things are supporting what your ultimate call to action, ultimate goal is for that campaign. If you have competing goals, then you're not going to be able to really measure to see what was effective or not. Now, on the flip side, if you're trying to test and you're trying to see, does mobile work better than digital, or how does this work? That's a different situation. That's where you're trying to just do kind of an A/B test, or you've got your control group. Just manage that appropriately so that you can see maybe a headline answers gets more response, or maybe, you know, this media got more response. That's a different thing. So to sum it up, I just really want to remind everybody that developing an effective marketing strategy for the businesses that you're working with are really their key to growth, expansion, and long-term success. So if you go in with the idea that you're not selling, you're connecting, and you're using data to help make the story and create the story, as long as you're doing it in an honest way with good data that supports what the client needs are, then ultimately all of that planning will go to more closings, more relationships with clients, and more successful advertising campaigns. So, whew, making sure that I'm hitting my deadline for everybody. So that is all I had for you guys.
Renee, we had a few questions come in from the attendees.
Okay.
So one of the questions was, sorry, what was that?
Did I stop sharing?
Yeah, that's fine. You can stop sharing at that point.
Okay.
Pulls everyone's faces up.
Oops, no, I almost hit leave meeting, so I'm gonna not touch anything.
That's fine too. How much time do you recommend during that prospecting phase? How much time do you recommend for ad reps to spend gathering data and information?
Ooh, good question. I'm not a big proponent of boxes, you know, saying that a sales call should take this long, or I think the key is, who is the client? What do you need to know about them? So for example, if you're meeting with a client that is in an industry that is, let's say it's more B2B, for example, you may not know as much about it. So the sales rep might need to spend more time researching. Think about that kind of like a higher involvement product that you're buying. You're going to spend a little bit more time, because not only might the sales rep be educating him or herself with regard to what is the problem in this industry, how does my product fit, you know, what might I be recommending, and they're reading press releases and the website and all of these things, that might take longer. Whereas if it's something like a local pharmacy, then it's just a matter of going to the website, researching, looking at social media, seeing what they're posting, what the engagements look like, looking at reviews. Then it just could be a real quick sweep of some things, but it's what do you find in that information that also helps you drive, now where do I go? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that was helpful.
Another question we had, and I'm not sure if you'll have the answer to this one or not, but is there any paid data sales support services you recommend or have used in the past?
Paid data sales support services? So meaning like buying data from somebody?
Let's go with that.
Okay. So I'm a little biased there too, and because I did work for Claritas for so many years, and so they do have some small reports and solutions and demographic reports that you can get, but also there's, you know, Nielsen has Scarborough and some of the other, although a lot of them have split out and I don't know who owns who these days, but there are some others out there that, you know, P&A licenses some of the data, but Jane would be able to direct you to Scarborough if you wanted to buy your own Scarborough study for your own market. So Scarborough has great. Jean, I don't know if you want to pop in and add anything to that.
I will, Renee. For all PNA members, we do have an active subscription to Nielsen Scarborough as well as AdMall. And the statistics that Renee had shared during her presentation come directly from sales sheets that we have available for you to access on our website. I believe that Matt shared a link in the chat bubble about where they can be found, or you can contact myself or Matt at any time, and we can walk you through that. We spend a lot of time on the phone with sales reps from our members base, walking you through the prospecting and share whatever information we have. AdMall, for example, has really nice sheets that just give you an overview of a particular industry in case you really don't have any knowledge about outdoor power equipment, for example. We can kind of send you a one-sheeter that gives you details on that, as well as media usage, spending habits, those kinds of things. So we have those subscriptions that we cannot share the login with you, but we can share the reports with you.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say too, Renee, from our side, companies we've worked with in the past that are available to media companies, Pulse Research, Coda Ventures, Jane had brought up AdMall, Co-op Connect. There's a number of those companies out there that offer these kind of services directly to newspapers and specialize with them.
Yeah.
So at least from our side, those are ones we've run into that really help provide that. And I saw Matt Miller from Trib shared in the chat too. Marketing Solutions Group is another one that has data specific to media companies.
Cool. Excellent.
Again, just reminding folks, if they have questions, they can share them right in the chat. We can answer them there. We have a few minutes left here to be able to take any questions. If anyone has additionals that they'd like to ask Renee while we have her here. Renee, I had one for myself, if you don't mind.
No.
What's your view on, now when I'm prospecting myself, I use a lot of LinkedIn data to go on and try and find things on there. What's your view kind of delving into that? And is it creepy to start reaching out to people through like LinkedIn if you haven't connected with them before?
I love that you said, is it creepy? No, you know what? I think it's creepier when people don't have information out there. So I think that especially as long as you're using LinkedIn appropriately and you're not violating what people's expectations are. I know I've reached out to people that I was not connected with to try to connect with them and ask them questions, or, if I was working on something. I can tell you that even from like the student perspective, when I've had students say, oh, this company contacted me about an interview, I don't know, are they a good company? Well, I went out to their LinkedIn page. The CEO had nothing out there. People had nothing. So that's why I said that on the flip side, it's a little bit more creepy if you don't have anything, because that does not make you a reputable business. So I do believe in looking at LinkedIn, connecting with people, asking questions, putting a little blurb out there if you're just trying to take a little survey about, hey, how do you feel about this? But you're keeping it within the expectations of what people want to respond to within LinkedIn. Not sure if that answers your question, but I mean, I absolutely think that it is a good resource.
That's great. I think that wraps up our questions for here today. So thank you, Renee. And I want to pass it over to Mike to kind of close us out today.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you.
There we go.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks to everybody for attending today's session. Special thanks to Renee for sharing such valuable information. And just a reminder that the last session of the Advertising Symposium, Securing Profitable Salespeople, will be held tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you have not registered for this session, would like to attend, please contact the Pennsylvania News Media Association by emailing events@panewsmedia.org or visiting the PNA website's contact page. Thanks, everybody.